welcome back. Now that my computer unfroze itself, we were talking about baby and about how the baby formula is determined by taking the mama and dividing everything by cosine squared. So I would go back if I could, but I didn't rewrite everything. Sine squared over cosine squared is tangent. Cosine over cosine is 1. And 1 over cosine is secant. And again, you can also create those variations with simple addition, subtraction. So tangent squared is equal to secant squared minus 1, and 1 is equal to secant squared minus tangent squared. Something else I wanted to point out that I didn't really have a whole lot of space on the page before with the reciprocals, but I really want to point out now that you've kind of seen it in action. So if you have secant, for example, and that looks like the same color, so I want to switch that up. Because I know this one you can tell. If you have secant, and you, for the life of you, cannot remember, is it 1 over sine, or is it 1 over cosine? You know it's 1 over something, and it has to be one of those two, because it's only created out of sine and cosine. Your answer is going to be cosine. If you're looking at cosecant, and you're like, man, I know it's 1 over sine or cosine, I can't remember which one it is, your answer is sine. The first letter of the corresponding reciprocal will not match. They're opposite. If you see the word secant, you have cotangent. If you have cotangent, it's sine. They're opposite. That's the best way for me to remember it. That's how I've always remembered it. That was the only way I could figure it out when I was going through it, and I was like, man, it's a great way. They're never the same. So if you can't ever remember, and you know they came from cosine and sine, that's how it goes. Moving forward, we're going to go ahead and simplify the following expressions. So, yes, unfortunately we are going to FOIL. I know, so terrible, so mean by making you FOIL. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times cosine is cosine. Negative cosine times 1 is negative cosine. Negative cosine times cosine is negative cosine squared. Well, we see here in the middle that those will cancel out. Bye, Felicia. So we get 1 plus negative. Well, which one wins out? The positive or the negative? Good, the negative. So I have 1 minus cosine squared. Well, I'm dealing with cosine. My assumption is I'm going to try and look for the mama somewhere. And if you remember, the mama was sine squared plus cosine squared equaled 1. So does anyone have an idea as to what they think the simplified version is? Well, couldn't I just subtract my cosine over with the 1? Yeah. So my answer here is sine squared. The second one. Now, I like to change everything I can into cosine and sine. We just talked about secant. So what is secant? Is it sine or is it cosine? It's cosine, but it's 1 over cosine. So this one becomes 1 over cosine. Sine will stay the same. But what about tangent? what does tangent turn into? Think about it, think about it, think about it. Sine over cosine. Well, if you notice, there's an invisible 1 here, and I'm multiplying fractions, so I get 1 over cosine is equal to, is not equal to. I have 1 over cosine minus sine times sine is sine squared, just like x times x is x squared. 1 times cosine is cosine. And if you notice, they have the same denominator. So I can put the numerators together. I have 1 minus sine squared of x over just regular cosine. No squareds, no extras. You're just adding and subtracting fractions, so as long as the denominators match, you're good to go. Well, again, I have something with 1 in sine. Doesn't that kind of look like I'm going to use mama a little bit? Good. So that one's going to change into cosine squared of x over cosine of x. And if you have essentially 2 over 1, it just reduces down to 1. So your final answer is cosine of x. This one can be approached 2 different ways. I'm going to go with what I think is the easier version of it, because otherwise you're going to be multiplying and dividing by several sets of fractions, and I really don't want to do that to you. I said everything, let's change everything into cosines and sines. Well, the first one I can't change, it's already sine. I don't want to change it into secant, I want to change it into cosecant because I want to try and change things out. And if I change that into cosecant, I know cotangent's not going to be made of anything. But I know tangent is going to be made out of sine and cosine eventually. So I'm going to leave the sine squared alone, the 1 over sine squared. I'm going to change 1 over tangent squared into cotangent. And he's squared because my tangent was squared. Thinking about how I want to get this into terms of sine and cosine, I'm still going to leave that as 1 over sine squared. If you go back in your notes, I'm not going to because again I don't have it written on my slides since my computer froze. Go back in your slide. What did I say cotangent was equal to in terms of sine and cosine? Good, it's I keep making my subtractions equal signs, I apologize. So cotangent is equal to cosine over sine. And since cotangent is squared, so is cosine and sine. And again, now I have the same denominator. So I have 1 minus cosine squared on top is equal to sine squared on the bottom. Well, again, cosine and 1 looks like I'm going to be using mama because mama was made out of 1s and sines and cosines. So what is my new top going to be? What is the top of that fraction going to turn into? It's going to be sine squared. And we know that sine squared over sine squared, or anything over itself, is just simply 1. I know it seems like we've gone through a lot of material, and you're correct, we've done some stuff, but we're going to refresh our memories on this next one. Haha, logs. So if I have a log of m times a log of n, that's the same thing as log m plus log of n, and vice versa. If I see log m plus log n, I just know to multiply. If I have a division problem, it turns into subtraction. Or vice versa, if I have a subtraction problem, I can divide them. And if I have exponents, the exponents turn into coefficients. Remember that a little bit? I know we weren't too fond of it, but we kind of remember it. Alright, first problem on the left. I'm going to make this. First, I see coefficient. So I know coefficients turn into exponents. So I have log of 45 minus log of 3 squared. Well, what is 3 squared? It's 9. So I have log of 45 minus log of 9. What did we say subtraction turned into? Good, division. So I have log of 45 divided by 9. What is 45 divided by 9? It's simply 5. So my answer here is log 5. You already know we're going to go ahead and go straight to division because I see subtraction. What is 16 divided by 4? Good, it's just 4. And my last problem. Try this one on your own. Pause the video, do it on your own, come and check the answer. It's a little bit bigger in this case, but it is log of 162. Alright, your homework's worksheet.